building companies are also feeling the squeeze. Rising costs, skills shortages. You've heard these issues and it's playing out right now. MiHaven Director Sarah Mort is at the nexus of that supply and demand curve that seems so out of whack, Sarah. How has the current crisis challenged your understanding and expectation and place in the housing market?
I suppose for James and I, we've always sort of navigated in different sort of niches of the market. I've got to say, having lived up here for nearly 20 years and post the GFC, we saw a very flatlined sort of property market in Cairns. So it was incredibly affordable, and it sort of matched almost where the medium sort of income was in Cairns. But post-COVID, it's been like a tidal wave, like a train wreck. And I think we're only at the very beginning of seeing the wicked problem that's going to arise. And it's not just going to be with affordability and social housing issues and homelessness. It's actually going to start to impact the expectation of young people of home ownership, which in Cairns most people have been able to get quite good access into that with the government incentives and the affordability. But when your medium house price jumps by 40% within 2 years, which is unprecedented in anywhere, especially Cairns, that's going to get out of reach for many, many people. So as we learnt yesterday at the conference, the problems are, as the chair was saying, it's social, it's cultural, it's affecting everyone. But there's another niche area that's also impacting, which is women over 55 who are actually identified as being the most vulnerable. And for a lot of them, because of the asset test, they don't get any benefit of being able to access any housing through Department of Housing or social housing. They are the ones who are actually to be potentially the most vulnerable in keeping a roof over their head. And there's some really interesting stuff that Jenny Brown's involved in, and a few other people. I think they've been test casing some concepts down in Brisbane with a sort of more of a share housing concept for these women. You know, these women have raised families, they've worked hard, they've contributed to society, but they've probably been through a divorce, they've probably been through a major illness, and they have no access of any government support. So I feel like there are so many other sort of niche areas. There's James and I being housing developers, but actually we have a very social conscious about what we're doing. There are areas that we're quite sort of passionate about thinking how else we can contribute to sort of provide roofs for people's heads over here in Cairns and make sure we have got affordable housing options.
It is just a coincidence that yesterday we were hearing from an organiser with the Far North Queensland Greens. They're screening a documentary in Cairns this evening called Undercover, The Hidden Faces of Homelessness at the Cairns Colonial Club, highlighting that very example that you've offered, the 55-plus-year-old women who are finding themselves in such a vulnerable situation. Sarah Mort from MiHaven is with us. I want to talk to you about another niche. Your company set out to exploit one of those opportunities, the unprecedented demand for student accommodation, which continues in our community, and yet your plans through MiHaven have stalled.
Yes, that's correct. So back in 2018, James and I pioneered the very first purpose-built student accommodation, MiHaven Living, in Parramatta Park, and we built 135 rooms. Since then, to try and repeat that model now, the land price has increased by 45%. Construction cost back then probably was around about $1,800 a square metre. We're probably looking at over $3,000 a square metre to build that. But the other part of that too is the operating costs of running these facilities is no different to running a hotel. So, you know, the rates, our insurance went up from something like $60,000 a year to nearly $240,000 a year. And then you've got the price point for students. You know, the affordability for them is around about $35 to $40 a night, and then it caps out. So what I've learnt in the last few months talking to bigger players in the space, especially at JCU University, you need scale to make it work. You need something like 400 beds on one property to make that work. And it's not really a scale that works in Cairns of putting 400 students in one facility. Our facilities bed basically 40 people per facility. That's sort of in individual apartments. So James and I have been talking to the state government about, and federal government, that they don't see it as, they see it probably more as a private sector issue, but international education into Cairns contributes about $56 million a year to the gross income. In addition, it exports about $54 million. It employs about 400 full-time employees. Apart from JCU, TAFE and CQ University, which are all market leaders in the space, we've got about another 15 international colleges that are providing education, employment, and also these international students provide so many things to our society, culture, fill in all the jobs that a lot of other people do not want to do. Hospitality is essential. So they are a great contributor. They don't get to vote. And they also, definitely contribute to our economy. So for us to stay as a market leader in international education in Australia, I see student accommodation actually as an essential infrastructure, and it needs to be, I think, a co-partnership with public and private enterprise to try and see if we can address this issue.
MiHaven Director Sarah Mort just giving some context around the flow-on effects of the housing crisis. As much as it is just hurting you and I and every resident of far north Queensland, it's the other sectors of the regional economy that rely on people, you and I, being able to have security in our housing arrangements that is so far-reaching, which is why a housing summit was trying to address some of these issues yesterday. Sarah, it's as you've pointed out, it's not only getting the supply right, but it's about getting the right supply so it actually meets the needs of our region. How can we do that? How can private companies play a role when the market forces, as you've understood them, have been essentially thrown out the window in the current environment?
Yeah, I think one of the big takeouts yesterday is we have to really think outside the box economically, the way we see land tenure. There was a dynamic group up in the Tablelands which are sort of benchmarking some different ways of thinking. And the key takeout I got from listening to Darren... Pardon me while I try and remember everyone's names at this conference.
Well, there was 100 stakeholders in the room.
Yeah, Darren Finlay represented people, purpose and place. And he said what we're all forgetting is actually the people part of the conversation. But in addition to that, when I go and put my sort of town planning hat on and land development hat, I think land tenure is another issue that we need to think about. So I get disappointed when governments are selling surplus land and without any key sort of pinpoint to industry or market sector that land should be basically repurposed for. We had an interesting conversation with some colleagues from Atherton Council yesterday, and I said, look, if the land could be put in on a leasehold basis at a very low leasehold price, if you can take that chunk of the development cost out, I think you're going to start to see a chain reaction of better solutions and more affordability because we can't get the cost of building down. That's not going to happen. It's gone up 40%. It might plateau a little bit, but we're not seeing it. We saw, I think, concrete went up again about a month ago by another 12%. So, these prices are still escalating. But yeah, from a really simple way of looking at it, if the land can be brought in, especially from a government partnership with private enterprise, that could be one way of looking differently. We know councils giving all sorts of infrastructure benefits on release to developers if it's purpose-built for housing. But I think you need a lot of other factors playing in it.
Sarah Mort, thank you for giving us even more to think about when we kind of grapple with this ongoing challenge facing our community. Really appreciate your insights, and I've written that down. People, purpose, place. I'm going to have to track down David Finlay's. That sounds like another really interesting conversation, and thank you for being a part of ours.
Thank you.